Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our Women's Wednesday series. This is our third part of our Women's Leadership series with Denise Mills and Robin Sterneck. Today, we're going to focus on grow through what you go through. And as I said, this is the third part of our series. We have been recording all of our sessions. And so if you have missed the first two, you can certainly revisit those on our YouTube channel. We'll also be recording this session and posting it on our YouTube channel as well. So you can certainly come back to this session and share it with others that you think could benefit as well. So at this time, I want to go ahead and hand things over to Denise Mills and Robin Sterneck to get us going.
Thanks, Brandy. And Brandy, before you go, is that YouTube channel, Kansas City Women's Business Center? Is that the channel?
Yes, it is. Yes.
Yep. I just want to make sure we stated that so everyone could find those other two series. So again, good morning, everyone, and welcome back to those of you who are with us, who have been with us through all three series, but maybe you're joining us for the first time. And we're just happy to have you here. Robin and I, so I'm Denise Mills, and I'm the Chief Mindset Officer of the Leader Fuel Center. And I have my wonderful partner here with me, Robin Sterneck, who is President of Sterneck Capital Management. And Robin and I have the privilege of working with women's groups all across the country, in fact, all across the globe. And we love helping women grow in confidence and also helping them advance in their careers. And that's what this series has been all about. So we hope that you do go check out the first two sessions if you haven't had a chance to participate in them, because we've shared a lot of great tools and a lot of great information to help you grow in confidence and advance in your careers. So we named this one, I think very appropriately, Grow Through What You Go Through, because this has been a uniquely challenging time for people. And quite frankly, personally, I'm concerned about people's mental health. They don't have the tools that they need to keep themselves out of the downward spiral. We know that through every adversity or every time of adversity, there is opportunity. And that's what we want to focus on today is what are the opportunities that are happening all around us through this time, even though in some ways it's been somewhat difficult. So some of the questions we're going to ask you is, how can we grow from this? Where did we take life for granted potentially, and our relationships for granted? I love asking this question, and we will absolutely encourage you to use the chat, and we'll follow that along the way as well. But where have we, what have we learned that is new during this time? New practices that we've had and so forth that maybe we would not have thought of had we not been so-called forced to shelter in place or forced to work from home because of a pandemic. And what should we keep from this? What have we learned, and what do we appreciate now that we maybe didn't appreciate before? Not only about what we have learned about ourselves during this time, about how resilient we are, how creative we are. People would say, you know, they're not creative, and yet I've seen some very creative things happening as a result of this pandemic. Creative ways of keeping teams involved, creative ways of keeping ourselves healthy and taking care of ourselves. But also, what have we learned about others? What have we learned about the people that we have been working with? I've heard so many stories about learning things about people who have worked in the cubicle right next to us, or worked side by side with us, or worked in our teams. And yet, for whatever reason, we kept our work life and our home life very separate. And now we've had a very intimate glimpse into each other's lives because we're working from spare bedrooms and from kitchen tables, and seeing cats walk across the keyboards and children interrupting Zoom meetings. And all of that has just given us a very human look at each other, where before we might have stayed in a very professional mode. And I think there's some really good things that we can learn about these times. So again, how can we grow through this time and all that we're going through? So at the end, Robin, I'm going to ask you to remind me to ask this question of you and of all of those that are participating. But one of the things I want to wrap up with is, what are some of the tools that each of you use to keep your attitudes healthy and to take care of yourselves and to keep yourselves looking forward to something, to keep your energy up during this time? I hear people say things like we're zoomed out, and yet it's the way of the world, and it will be for a little while longer. So, how can we keep ourselves healthy, and how can we advance in our careers, advance in our relationships? How can we make the most of this particular time? So I want to end with that, of those positive ideas. Robin?
I was just going to add on and make sure we don't turn WFH from work from home to work forever hours, because
Right.
that's happening as well. And we've discussed that in prior sessions, and we'll talk about things related to that as well today. I'm also going to encourage you, as Denise did, to use the chat. And if you do, please choose the option that says panelists and attendees, because everybody would like to hear what you're thinking or saying as we go through this, or any questions that you may have. Thanks.
Yep. Thank you, Robin. So that all being said, and that was, Robin, a perfect lead into this opening, which is how would you describe your current reality? And let me just describe what we have on screen. I draw this visual. It seems like in every conversation I have, even on Zoom, I'm drawing it on a piece of paper and holding it up to the screen. But here's what this stands for. So the V at the top stands for vision. And the vision question is, how do you want things to be? What are your goals? I mean, typically we talk about vision as goals, but I'm going to ask the question differently and ask you, like, how do you want things to be? The CR stands for current reality. And Robin and I both do a lot of coaching. And so often in a coaching session, someone might share, here's what's going on with me. And so they talk about current reality. And I'll right away ask the question, well, how do you want it to be? And it's so interesting. They'll answer with, I don't know, I just want it to go away, or I just want it to be better. But they really haven't thought through how they ideally want it to be in great detail and with great clarity. If you haven't thought about how you want it to be, then what happens is that squiggly line. So obviously the most direct path from current reality to vision is a straight line. It's that straight arrow, right? But if we haven't thought about how we want things to be with clarity, we wander all over the place, and all of a sudden we hit a wall and we're like, well, that's not how I want it to be. And as Robin said, we don't want to work forever hours. But that's what's happening because we haven't had the vision of how do we separate work from our evening home life, or whatever those end of work hours are, and truly get away from work when work is in our spare bedrooms or right across the room. Our laptops are with us everywhere we go. So what is that vision of end of the day and quality family time look like with clarity? Without that, we have this wide squiggly line. With clarity, our path is more direct and it looks more like this. So it's a more clear, I mean, sure, we're not going to necessarily go straight ahead. We're going to have a little variance, but we're going to get that feedback much more quickly. And that squiggly line represents time, energy, and money. So if we stretched that squiggly line up, we would have exceeded our expectations on our vision by the amount of energy and time that we put into it. So clarity is so important. How do you want it to be? So let me give you a couple of examples so that we're not working forever hours. One of the women that I work with, she had this great idea really early in March or April, shared this with me. And she said, I go through the motions of, at the end of my workday, physically turning my computer off, physically turning it off. And what that signifies is I am done with my workday. It's just a mental sort of subconscious end of the day. And she said, I turn it right back on because I use my computer for personal things and so forth. So I turn it right back on. But when I turn it off, I walk out of the room, I walk around, I take a break. And then when I come back in and I turn it back on, I'm not turning it back on to work. I'm turning it back on for my personal life and trying to separate it. And I thought that was just a really good, simple, very simple exercise. And others have told me they close the door to the spare bedroom, that they literally take their laptops off of their kitchen table, which I think is a great idea, and move it out of the way, move it into another room. I mean, it's those kinds of simple ideas that keep us from working forever hours. So how do you want it to be? I mean, if you think about just the last 6 or 7 months, there's some really good things that happened early on. I used to say, which is kind of a funny thought today, but I used to say things like, I wish I could just push the pause button and just have the whole world stop and just kind of take a deep breath and choose what I want to do and live my life very intentionally moving forward. And I felt like I had that opportunity in mid-March, where all of a sudden everything just paused and we're all like, wait, what is happening right now? But that pause stopped a lot of our children's activities. In my case, I don't have children at home, but I have grandchildren. And we put a pause on all of those activities, and families went back home and had dinner together around the table. In fact, some families were cooking together because we couldn't go to restaurants. So what are our new habits? What habits do we need to leave behind? And what new habits do we really want to have with our families so that we can be as intentional as we want to be, not only in our home lives, but in our relationships? And here's what's so important about this. We are drawn toward our predominant thoughts. We are drawn toward what we think about most frequently. So think about what you think about. I know that's a funny thing to say, but think about what you think about. Are most of your thoughts about worry, or are most of your thoughts about hope, about what you're enjoying, about gratitude? Do you spend time looking forward, or are you dwelling on some of, I'm going to say, miseries, some of the inconveniences of this current time? What are your distractions? And if you don't think about what you're thinking about, and I'll give you a different visual, if you can see me in like the video of myself, but this is a rubber band. And this visual works like think of this top part is the vision and this bottom part is current reality. And there's always tension in our lives. The question is, are we going to move forward toward the vision? Or are we going to be brought down almost into a downward spiral into a current reality that we can't really get ourselves out of and see ourselves out of? So as I'm talking, what I'd like to do is just pause for a second. And I want you to think about, how do you want it to be? What's the best thing that can happen throughout the holidays, for example, while the holidays are going to look very different than they've probably looked before for any of us? How do you want to come through this and through this time in a better way, in a better place, learning something about yourself, learning about something and appreciating something in your relationships that maybe you have taken for granted? So my point of all of this is, how do we grow through what we're going through? And here's just an example of, I said our predominant thoughts affect our outcomes. That's important. Our predominant thoughts affect our outcomes. So you know this in golf, right? Whether you're a golfer or not, we know this about golf. If you're golfing and there's water and a golfer focuses on the water, what do they get? Well, probably the next sound they hear is a plunk or a splash, because their ball's going to go into the water. Golfers are trained to focus on the outcome that they want. So to focus on the green, so focus beyond the water, and not even to think water, but to think green. So thinking green will sail their ball by virtue of the muscles and their thought processes, will sail the ball to land on the green. Here's a really interesting thought that aligns with this that maybe you haven't thought about. In racing, race cars, and you can imagine race car drivers are going around the track at several hundred miles an hour. And around those curves, They are not trained to focus on the curve. They are focused on pulling themselves out of the curve. If they focus on the wall, they will hit the wall. They can't even think wall. They have to think. They have to think the point in which they want to go with their car, which is beyond the curve and into the straightaway. And they are trained to think that way. But the interesting thing is, it's not a natural thought. As you're going around the curve, you're thinking to yourself, don't hit the wall, don't hit the wall. And they are not trained to think that way. They're trained, and here's the key point. They are trained to think on the recovery point. Even if they start to lose control of their car and their car skids or slips, they're thinking recovery. They are not thinking, oh no, or skid. They're thinking recovery point. So I'm going to ask that question again. What's our recovery point through this whole process, through this whole time? How do you want it to be? How do you want to come through this in a much better place? So again, the big question that we'll be focusing on is, how can you grow through what you're going through? How can you grow through this time? And we've got some tools for you, as we always do, real practical tools. Now, right now, you might feel like you're in the messy middle part of all of this. You're right there in the middle. But here's the important aspect of this. We have to create our own light at the end of the tunnel. We have to choose to think about how we want things to be, or we will just stay in this messy middle. What's your recovery point? What can you learn from this? And honestly, we do have to choose to. And you've heard this phrase, hindsight is 20/20. I know in my life that without the adversity that I have gone through, I wouldn't be the person that I am today in a much better and stronger way. I have learned, and I don't like going through those times of adversity, those times of challenges. And quite frankly, I don't like going through the mistakes that I have made or the errors that I have made. I don't like going through them. But those are the times, if I reflect back, those are the times of my greatest growth. My greatest growth. And I'll tell you just a kind of a funny, quick story about that. I remember I remember the distinct day, this was probably 20 years ago, that I had my greatest growth curve, or my greatest growth as a facilitator. And it was the messiest, ugliest facilitation ever. And here's what had happened. I was invited to facilitate a panel. So I was the moderator of a panel. And I had identified the two panelists. I chose the two panelists because they were high energy. They were great storytellers. I just knew this was just going to be a great panel. There were several things I didn't know, and I'll tell you about that in a minute. So I started the panel. I introduced the panelists. I let them start talking, asked them that first question. And I got to tell you, the responses of the panelists were so flat. The responses of the panelists were so, they were so, I want to say corporate speak. They didn't tell stories. They just suddenly, their tone was monotone. It was so flat. And I in my head, I was like, what is happening right now? This is so not like them. And they were reading from scripts. I don't know what was going on in their heads, that I think they wanted to get it perfect. They wanted to get it right. So they had so scripted out what they were going to say that it just didn't flow out of them naturally. They knew they knew the topic area. They were experts in this area. And after about 5 or 6 or 7 long minutes, I mean, long minutes, I was starting to feel the audience get antsy. I was getting antsy. I'm like, no, tell a story. What's happening? And the voice in my head was saying, don't interrupt, let them go, because surely they're going to wrap up here with a story, or surely this is going to change. Surely. I kept thinking and giving them so much credit. And in that moment, I forgot that's my responsibility. I'm in charge of the energy of this panel. I should have interrupted them much sooner than I did. I finally did, but I waited too long. And I learned that I, as a moderator, am responsible. I learned so many lessons from that. I learned that people that I admire, which I admired these two individuals greatly, that I gave them too much credit for an environment that is not their natural environment, that I had to walk them through and coach them through, even though they were experts in the topic area. I was more of an expert when it came to the facilitation part. I learned that I needed to, and I always now do this, but I did not do this at this time. I learned that I needed to allow people to rehearse, and we did not rehearse. We did not have the pre-call, which again, I always have a pre-call with my panelists. But I learned to do a pre-call to say, here's what I want from you. I want you to tell these stories that I know about you. I've heard you tell these stories before. It will engage the audience. I want to engage. I want you to keep your answers short so that we can banter back and forth. But none of that happened in that panelist because, and here are some of the lessons learned, I didn't set healthy expectations. I didn't see myself as the leader. I did not see myself as the facilitator leader of that event. I was more of a moderator, and that's a very different role. So I learned so much from that, but it was honestly, it was the worst scenario. Now the audience afterwards, once I started prompting and getting the panelists to where I needed them to go and stepped in and leaned into my role, it went so much better. And the audience in the end had a good time. But I will tell you, I was sweating through those first 10 minutes, which is like, this is not how it's supposed to go. And I'm sure you've had those scenarios as well. But had I not had that scenario, the second part is I took the time to reflect on how did I contribute to the potential failure. It wasn't really a full failure, but the potential failure of that event. What was my contribution to it? What could I have done differently? How could I grow through this? What could I learn for the next time? How could I recover and be a much more better facilitator? Now, my other choice was I could just, like, that was so bad, I choose not to do this again. And if anybody invites me, I'm just going to say no. Because the other story in my head could have been, I'm bad at this. This did not go well. And now this is my new story. Or I can choose to grow through it. And that's what I chose. And I'm so glad I did. I'm glad that I did versus I wish I had. I'm glad that I interrupted and redirected instead of afterwards saying, I wish I had. I did have a little wish I had in me, which is I wish I would have grabbed hold of my own courage sooner and interrupted and redirected. I wish I had, but I'm glad I did when I finally did. So Robin, do you have a story like that? Surely your life hasn't been perfect. I know how awesome you are in so many ways, but we all have had situations like this. So jump in here, Robin, and share a story that you've had that you've grown through. And you're muted, Robin. I don't want to miss this story because I'm hoping you have them to make me feel better about myself.
I probably have one every day. I just don't know if I have the self-awareness to always recognize them. But when I think professionally, we've all had personal challenges that somehow we come through and time helps us through. But on the professional front, I've had many things that I've done wrong and rethought afterwards and learned from. But the one that always comes to mind when you or someone else asks me this question happened over 20 years ago, but it had such a negative and positive imprint on me that it's always the one I think about. I don't know if how often any of you use the reply to all key on your computers, but I never use it, and I'll tell you why. 20 years ago, I was fortunate to be heading up a division of GE, and we were renegotiating an annual contract with our largest client for our division, which was also one of the largest clients for many of the divisions at GE. And it's an institution you all have, or your families have used, so it was a big name, big responsibility. And the team did a great job, and we got through, and it got all done. And they were very close to renewing, and we were going back and forth with emails with the team and everything on how to strategize on this. And we finally got very close, and I sent the team a note, which this was a good step, and there were good steps and bad steps. The good step was, loving the great work. Thank you so much. Let's get this over the finish line, and let's make sure we get some more price out of this guy. Those were my inappropriate words. And then I inappropriately hit the reply to all button. And unfortunately for me, the client was in the list of names. And I'm getting anxious just thinking about this right now. So I'm reading the anxiety slide here, Denise. But I don't know if any of you, I hope you haven't, but if you've ever been in even a minor car accident, everything slows down as it's happening, and other things in life as well. And I have been in a car accident where everything slowed down almost to the point where, in retrospect, I don't know why I couldn't stop the accident from happening, but that was impossible. But I watched my finger go down to that key, and I couldn't stop it. And what brought me back to reality was screaming, and it was me screaming because I had realized what I had done. But at the same time, I could hear somebody else screaming. And it was one of my teammates, and he was running towards my office to make sure I knew what I had done in case I hadn't realized it. And in the next 5 or 6 moments, a lot of learning took place, probably more than in many segments of my life. What I learned, which was positive, was I had the greatest team in the world because they all ran down the hall and they all wanted to know, what do I do to help? How can we stop this? Nobody was yelling at me at that point, but I was yelling at myself. I also learned that it's possible to remove the reply to all button, which I ultimately did in our division after this happened, because anybody could have done that. But I also learned that I was moving too fast. And it's a lesson I have carried with me forever because I'm a fast-talking, fast-thinking New Yorker, now happily transplanted in Kansas City for 20 years. But I was moving too fast, and I should have been more thoughtful than that. I also learned that I had more courage than I ever could have imagined because I sat there for a moment and I actually thought of the quote that you have on the prior page, Denise, from John Lennon, who died 40 years ago this week, which is unbelievable that that much time has passed. But the quote says, everything will be okay in the end. If it's not okay, it's not the end. And in that moment, I thought it was the end for 2 reasons. I thought we were going to lose this client. I knew I was in trouble with my peers who also shared that client for other services, and I was pretty sure I would get fired. This was GE's largest healthcare client. So I panicked for a moment, and then I found some courage I never knew I had, and I picked up the phone and called the client. And a great thing I learned at that moment was he said to me, I knew you would call. And that showed me that the team and I had built up grace with this client and trust that gave me the ability to work my way through this. And I said to him, you have a job and a mission, and I have a job and a mission. Mine is to make sure I've got the money to pay claims when your problems come to us. Your job is to fill the beds and to be the best service provider that you can. My job is to make sure I've got enough money to protect you when you need protecting. That's why I needed more price. And we renewed the contract at a higher price, and I lived to see another day. And then I collapsed. But I'm telling you, and all of that happened, that was way too long a story, but it happened in 5 minutes that changed my life. But this really thing is, I learned some really good things in that moment, and I learned some things by baptismal by fire that I changed immediately. So I had to go through that to be a better leader and a better partner with my clients, and it worked. I don't need to do that every day, but it worked. So that's my most impressionable moment, where I couldn't stand the pain of the moment, but that I learned something great by going through it.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. You know, that all that you described, Robin, I think we've all had I've had multiple situations where even as you were telling your story, like that pit in my stomach, just like your stomach just like churns, and you're like, oh my gosh, what just happened? What did I just do? Right. But some of the favorite things that I said about what your story, or that you said about your story, were that you pulled out that courage that you didn't know you had. Right. And these are times that we can reflect back on. And while times today are challenging, we've lived through a lot of challenging times, and we survived, and we might have even thrived. We might have even found courage that at that time served us well. And now we have new courage because we can reflect on that courage and know that this too will be okay, and this too will pass. And that we can look back and go how miserable it was, or we can look back and, like I said earlier, be glad we did, or look back and say, I'm glad I took the opportunity to grow and learn through that, than just to simply waste this time away, right? And not really make the most of these opportunities. So we have some grow through questions with you, which, by the way, I do want to thank you for stating that quote on the previous page, on the previous slide, but I also want to share this quote out loud as well, for those of you who can't see it, which is, anxiety is created by our overestimation of danger. So I think that's so interesting. We have an overestimation of risk and danger, and we have an underestimation often of ourselves and our ability to deal with it. And there's so many stories about superpowers that show up in the time of crisis. People who have lifted cars in situations where someone was run over and they lifted the car. Well, could they lift the car under normal circumstances? No, but they got these superpowers in the time of crisis. And I think we all have that in us, and it can come to the surface when we need it if we just choose to embrace it and engage it. So here are our grow through questions. My two kind of surface questions, which I seem like I'm asking myself all the time, is what am I supposed to learn from this? Or what can I learn from this? And how can I make the most of this? What good can come from this? And looking forward to the good and dwelling on the good instead of ruminating on things that I cannot control, I cannot change, and I did not choose. And the second group of questions is, which is some of what I mentioned earlier, is what will I miss when this is over? What is happening right now that I will miss? And what will I keep? In a previous session, we talked about start doing, stop doing, and continue doing, start, stop, and continue. But what will I keep when this is over that I'm not willing to give up? Because I've had some really quality conversations. I've connected with people all across the country. I have cousins all across the country, and we're doing regular Zoom calls. We would only see each other maybe once a year, maybe every other year at Christmas time. And now we're getting together on a regular basis on Zoom calls, which I so treasure catching up with them. But that's something I'm going to keep. That's not going to go away from our lives, because when we go so-called back to a normal, whatever that new normal is, we are still going to be spread out all across the country and only get together once a year or maybe twice a year in person. So what will I keep when this is over? So in our first session, we talked about the importance of self-awareness. And here's a question I want you to think about is, do you consider yourself an optimist or a pessimist? Because that's an important self-awareness attribute. And here's the interesting thing. Optimism and pessimism are learned traits. You were not born a pessimist and you were not born an optimist. You learned that through your experiences, and you decided this is how you were. You came to the belief that you are an optimist, or you came to the belief that you are a pessimist, and you didn't even know what those terms were. Someone shared that term with you and said, oh, wow, you're really an optimist. Or, oh, wow, you're really a pessimist. And you grabbed hold of that label, and then you put it on and you wore it, and it never went away. So are you an optimist or are you a pessimist? And what's the difference? What's the difference? You know, when we think of this half full, half empty glass, how do you look at things? Do you look at it half full, or do you look at it half empty? And the interesting thing is, whichever it is, optimists and pessimists simply make up a story about an observable situation or event, and it's the story that leans them optimistic or pessimistic. It's the story they make up. So now let me give you an example. Here's how optimists respond to good events, and here's how pessimists respond to good events. Optimists say to themselves, this is going to go on forever. It will be a good part of everything that I do. I somehow caused and contributed to it, so it raises my self-efficacy. Where pessimists, even when really good things happen, they're like, well, that was just luck. I didn't contribute to it. In fact, I had very little to do with it. It will pass. This won't stick. Its impact long-term will be limited. Nothing much will change from this. But an optimist will say everything will go well. And even an optimist will look at adverse situations and ask that question, what can I learn from this? Versus a pessimist has a hard time bubbling up that question. But yet you can learn that. All you have to do is be intentional with your thought processes. So here's how optimists and pessimists respond to bad events. Optimists in even bad events say, what can I learn from this? In some part, I'm responsible for this, but I'm responsible for my attitudes and my response to this. It will pass. Its impact will be limited. I'm not going to let it control who I am and what I do. I'm going to stay in control of my life. And again, it's a very efficacious thought. Pessimist, on the other hand, is kind of I always think of it like the Eeyore in the Winnie the Pooh. You know, Eeyore walks around with a cloud on his head, like, woe is me. Pessimists just go, yep, I knew it. I knew a bad thing was going to happen. When will the next shoe fall? When will the next shoe drop? Where optimists say, you know, this too will pass. So how do you think about risk? Because how optimists and pessimists look at risk is also interestingly different. Optimists look at risk and they say everything will work out. Okay. Yes, it's hard. It's not that either one is not a realist, right? The answer is the glass is half. It's not half full or half empty. It's just half. That's the truth. That's the fact. But full or empty is the way an optimist or a pessimist leans. So on the risk spectrum, where do you fall? Do you consider yourself a high risk person or a low risk? Do you have low tolerance for risk or high tolerance for risk? And I would love, this is a really fun part of what we can talk about, but what's the riskiest thing you've ever done? What is it? Like, go to the chat. Like, let's share some stories here. What's the riskiest thing you've ever done? Think about it. And think about how well it turned out. And even if it didn't turn out well, what did you learn from it? I know so many stories about people who just uprooted their whole families and took a job in another state, a state away from their family. I did that. I was 9 months pregnant and uprooted my entire family, and we moved out of state for my husband's job. He took a new job, and we talked about it. It's like, so, you know, is this a good idea? And you're 9 months pregnant and all, you know, and I'm going to miss out on so many things. I'm not going to have my family around me for this new baby and all of these things. But it was one of the best things that we ever did. We grew in so many ways as a family. We grew in so many ways by experiencing a whole nother city. We grew in so many ways in our careers. We experienced so many new things. But yeah, it was hard. It's not an easy thing to do. Now, we could have said no. We could have said, nope, too risky. You know, too many fears. We choose not to. So where do you fall in this spectrum? And I can see there's a few stories. Yeah, changing careers after 30 years, that's big. And yes, leaving corporate, let's call it the corporate safety net, and starting a new business, starting a consulting firm, right? Those are big moves. And some of you might say, well, I don't, you know, by comparison, I don't have a big story like that. Everybody has a story. Everybody has a story. It's not by comparison. It's what felt like a big risk to you. It could have been ending a relationship. It could have been ending a friendship that was not healthy for you. That might feel very risky, but yet it was ultimately very healthy. So here's a very current reality scenario, but where do you put yourself in the mask or no mask spectrum? Right now, there are people who are like, look, I don't need to wear a mask. It's fine. It's not that big a deal. It's just the flu, right? They have a high tolerance risk, right? Or a high risk for and a high tolerance where they don't feel the need to protect themselves. They have a high belief that things will be fine, right? And there's all different scenarios around that and all circumstances around that as well, where we have people who are very low risk, who if you remember in the very beginning, and I know my mom did this, not only did she wear masks and gloves and she wiped every Amazon box that showed up at her house, she wiped it down. And then she quarantined the box in her garage for 3 days before she brought the box in the house, right? Again, that was just the fear grabbing a hold of us. And the fear saying, and we didn't know, there were so many things we did not know about this virus, right? So we took I'm going to do everything possible to keep myself safe. And here's another example of this. There are, most people are working from home. There's still a high percentage of people working from home. I saw a survey about people working from home. And this survey was it was like May and June. And it was when companies were starting to think about, by fall, we're going to be bringing people back into the office. And they surveyed their people. And it was so interesting, the outcome. The outcome was 33% of the people said, I'm ready to come back to work. I'm all in, let's go. 33% of the people said, I am not coming back to work. I do not want to come back to work. And in fact, I have a risk scenario within my home. So I have a high risk person in my home, and it is not worth the risk to expose myself and potentially come back home and expose a family member. So I am not coming back to work. But the interesting third was the middle third. The middle third was undecided, and they said, I will determine whether I will come back to work or continue to work from home. I will determine that based on what safety protocols I see my employer engaging in. So if they are engaging in what I determine to be good safety protocols, then I will come back. If I don't see my employer engaging in good safety protocols, I choose to work from home if that's a choice. And I think that's what's very interesting is that third, and we are constantly assessing. We are constantly assessing. So here's one more kind of fun way to look at risk tolerance. What you see on the screen right now is let's say it's a 2-inch by 12-inch wide plank. So it's a thick plank that's 12 inches wide. And let's say it's 20 feet long. So that's a really long plank, okay? Now imagine this plank is stretched out in your house someplace on the floor, stretched out kind of between rooms. So do you have the ability to walk across this plank without stepping on the floor? Could you walk from one end of the plank to the other end of the plank and feel safe? Right? Most of us be like, well, yeah, that's no big deal. There's no risk whatsoever in walking across that plank. In fact, it's easy. And even if I tumble a little bit or I lose my footing, I'm not going to step off the floor because this is a 12-foot wide plank. I've got plenty of room to walk, right? Okay, now I'm going to take this plank and I'm going to raise it off the floor and put it up on cement blocks. So the plank is very sturdy on cement blocks, 3 feet off the ground. 3 feet off the ground. Could you walk from one end to the other and feel safe, feel risk-free? Now, already I'm starting to create anxiety in some of you. You're like, I'm afraid of heights. It's 3 feet off the ground. Okay, yeah, but you had the potential and you were very comfortable walking across it when it was on the floor. So it's the same plank and it's the same skill set. It's the same skill set. Okay, now I'm going to raise your anxiety a little more. Okay, you can comfortably and safely walk across this plank. What if I took this same plank and I took it on your rooftop and I stretched this plank from your roof to your neighbor's roof? Could you walk across it? Would you walk across that plank? Again, you safely walked across it when it was on the floor. What would it take? So you can throw this in the chat too. What would it take for you to walk across? Would you do it for $100? Would you do it for $1,000? Would you do it for no money whatsoever? What would you do it? Right? And the big awareness here is I could make this a 4-inch thick plank, and I could make this a 20-inch wide, very safe, very wide, but some of us would still choose not to. And it's simply our assessment of risk, our assessment of the risk. So what's your driving force? What's your motivator? What would it take for you to do it what's your why? What's your why? My driving force sometimes, I know one of my driving forces is, I call it my mama bear. Like, don't mess with mama bear. I will advocate for others. I would walk across that plank for my kids. I may not do it for myself, but I would do it for my kids. Robin, what are some of your motivators? You can, some of you in the chat can also do it as well. So what are your motivators?
Mine has been for much of my life fear of failure. And I think it's fear of failing others. And I don't know where that came from because I didn't come from a high expectation environment as a child, but I have taken it too far at times. So that strength, which I think is a strength, that you want to do things well and you want to help others, but if you take it too far, it becomes a weakness. Just like being risk averse is a good thing. As leaders, we need to be well informed when we take risks. We need to be using risk as a tool, but we also have to make sure that we don't swing too far either way. So that's what motivates me.
Yeah. And what you're describing is smart risk, taking smart risk, calculated risks. And that's true. I mean, I think we're always assessing and always making that determinant of, is it worth it or not worth it? If they have the phrase fail fast. How quickly can we identify that something's not working, and at what point should we pull the plug? And having the conversations about that even before we engage in some of the risks. This is just the process of thinking through. But we need to slow down and think. Slow down and think about it. And why do we avoid risk? Well, we avoid risk because it's outside of our comfort zone. And here's the crazy thing. Growth happens not in our comfort zone, but outside of our comfort zone. I found this graphic about like where the magic happens, right? But growth happens outside of our comfort zone. And we often say like, well, I want to stay in my comfort zone. Well, do we? Or do we really want to grow and grow in a safe way? So here's a tool I have for you. How do we grow? Oh, and I'll step back for a second. Robin and I met this really wonderful woman who, when we met her, she had an interesting black line right here on her wrist. And I didn't know, it looked like a Sharpie. Looked like there was like a 2-inch line right here, and it was a Sharpie line. And we were like, what is that line? And she said, well, actually, it's a tattoo. And it is a black line. It's a 2-inch black line tattooed on her wrist because she was a college athlete, and her coach had said to her that growth happens 2 inches outside of your comfort zone. You need to just simply stretch 2 inches outside of your comfort zone, and that's where you will grow. That's where you will really thrive as a champion. And that just stuck with her to remind herself that we don't have to go miles outside of our comfort zone. We just need to go 2 inches outside of our comfort zone and stretch. And then guess what? That becomes our new comfort zone. And then we stretch a little more and we stretch a little more. We are doing things today that we possibly couldn't have imagined 10 years ago because we've grown through things in our lives. And thank goodness we've had those things in our lives to grow through. So one last thing, and I'm going to turn it over to Robin to share some more tools with you, but here's a tool to stretch out, to stretch your comfort zone. So you all know this story about kindergarten roundup. Kindergarten is not normal. First day of kindergarten is not normal for any child, whether they go to daycare or not. Kindergarten is usually a new room, it's a new building, it's a new experience. And kindergartners, sometimes 5-year-olds, do not respond well to being out of their comfort zone. You know, mom or dad are a part of their comfort zone, right? But they've designed forever, for as long as we've known. It's been more than 50 years because my kids are grown now and they're in their 30s. But for years and years and years, we've had kindergarten roundup. And here's what kindergarten roundup is. It's a rehearsal of kindergarten, a visualization of what's going to happen to stretch children's comfort zone. And let me tell you about my experience with one of my children. Here's what happened. We went to kindergarten roundup. So I drove my daughter to school, to the building in which she was going to attend kindergarten. We got out of the car together. We did a mock. We did it twice. They did rehearsal of drop off. But first what we did is we parked and we walked over to the building. And they said, okay, welcome boys and girls. But what we're gonna have you do is we're gonna practice dropping off. So do you see how we're standing? And they rehearsed everything to minutia. So boys and girls, see how you're standing here? We're gonna have your mom walk back to the car with you. She's going to circle around the circle drive. She's gonna drop you off. She's gonna go park the car again. And then she's gonna meet you right here in this very same spot. Do you think that would be fun? And the boys and girls are like, yeah, that would be fun. She didn't say, do you think that would be hard? Do you think you can do it? She said, do you think that would be fun? And the kids are like, yeah, that would be fun. And so that's what we did. We got back in the car, we drove through the circle drive, we rehearsed the drop off. So that when we did it again later, and then we drove away, the kids are like, oh, that's how it works, right? So we walked into the building, we all sat together. So mom and dad sat on those little chairs with our child. We sat on those little chairs and the teacher talked to us, and in the room, strategically placed on the other side of the room are toys. Okay, toys. And there was an aide or a teacher over on the other side of the room. And every now and then she would just ding a bell on one of the toys. And the kids would look over and be like, can we go play? Can we go play? But they kind of like were sitting there and they were looking, and another teacher was playing with blocks. And after a while, the teacher that was in charge of this whole group, she would say, boys and girls, would you like to go play? And they're like, well, yeah, right. And they're like, boys and girls, we're gonna keep talking to mom and dad, but you go over there and play. And mom and dad are gonna stay right here. And the kids went over to the other side of the room. Not all the kids, some of the kids kind of stayed close to mom, but then they watched the other kids playing. And the teacher would every now and then say, boys and girls, if you want to go over and play with the other kids, you're welcome to. And eventually all the children went over because they couldn't not play, right? Okay, then here's the crazy part. Then what happened was that by this time the kids are playing, right? There's teachers over there playing and they're playing and you can hear laughter. And now the teacher goes over to the other side of the room with the kids and she says, boys and girls, I'm going to take your parents out of the room for just a minute and we'll be right back. Is that okay? We're going to be right back. And the kids by this time are just playing. They're like, yeah, go, fine, it's fine. So the teacher took us outside of the room. We stepped outside of the room and right away she looked at her watch and she timed 1.5 minutes, 90 seconds. And she said, we're just going to stand out here for 1.5 minutes, talk amongst yourselves. And us parents were like, what? And she's like, we're just going to stand here because we're rehearsing the children watching you leave the room and watching you come back. Because that's going to happen in kindergarten. You're going to leave. Now you're not going to come back for several hours, but we're just going to rehearse it and we're going to talk about the rehearsal. And I was like, wow, that's really interesting. So we did 1.5 minutes, we went back in. Teacher went over to the kids and said, hey kids, mom and dad are back. And by this time, again, the kids aren't even noticing, right? But then we sat back in those chairs and she said, parents, here's what I want you to do. Because this was in April or May. All summer long, I want you to remind your children of how much fun they had playing with the toys. I want you to remind them and rehearse in their minds how you left the room and how you came right back. You need to remind them. And the more that you rehearse this with them, the easier they will have in their separation anxiety in coming back. And we need to remember that with our teams. This is a change management tool. This is a change when change happens, we need to rehearse the change in our minds rather than just jumping into it. The more that we can visualize the successful change or the outcome, the easier it is for us to go through it and grow through it. The easier it is for us to anticipate the good because we've already visualized it in our mind. So a big tool for you to manage risk is mental rehearsal through the tool of visualization. Visualize the best outcome and you will be drawn toward it. But if you can't imagine a good outcome, it is hard to make it happen in your lives. And Robin, I know you have several more tools that we can share with everyone. So let's talk about those different tools.
Yeah, just before we even go to this slide, the way I've heard visualization used is by elite athletes. So elite athletes, especially skiers, which is one of my areas of fun, is that they ski the mountain a couple of times, but then they mentally go over it and over it and over it. And two things happen. By going over it and over it, just memorizing the gates, and I'm talking about competitive downhill skiers, they can feel it and sense it. They see themselves quickly going across the finish line. They see themselves getting to the other side of this risk. And they've then actually got their body ready for that. And the other thing that happens is that they've been trained, and I know Denise has done a lot of work with Olympic athletes in this area, is that they are trained to depend on their own skills, not attribute a good run or a bad run to the mountain, because then the mountain wins. But if you attribute the success to yourself, not just it's always good to say it was like I had a little luck or a little wind at my back. But if we can actually visualize our own skills and our own growth taking us across the finish line, that is a way to actually get ourselves more comfortable with taking measured risks, however, whatever measurement that is. The next slide that Denise put up is one that if you're as old as me, you will remember every night on one of the only 5 TV stations that we had, a show called MASH, which was during a war, and it was about a medical outpost way out in a field hospital, and there were all these fantastic characters. On the left is a guy named they called Radar, and the gentleman on the right is a priest, Father Mulcahy. And if you remember this episode, it's my ultimate I can do it kind of hype moment for me, because I could, once I visualize things with a little help, I always think I can do just about anything. In this particular episode, they had a comrade who had been blown up out in the field, and these 2 guys got to him first, and they ended up doing a tracheotomy with a big pen to save this soldier's life. And that's what's going on there. Raiders listening into the walkie-talkie where Hawkeye is saying, all you got to do is cut this guy's throat open and put a pipe in there. And they, of course, did what we would have done, was go, no way, no how, I can't do that. But in the moment, they were able to visualize other things they had done, things they had seen the doctors do, and with help, which we all need, it takes a village, they were able to save the soldier's life. So when I'm on that precipice of I can't or I want to, I often think of this and everything seems easier. A way that we can build that confidence in ourselves is in the first tool on the next page. Beyond visualizing things, we should do a self-assessments on ourselves periodically, on our teams, on our businesses, and our organizations. This is a SWOT analysis. There are various versions of this. Perhaps you've used this one. I use this one a lot when I need to reground my confidence and take an informed risk. I remind myself of the strengths that I or the organization have. I am realistic about the weaknesses and try to figure out how can I shore them up or avoid things that require those gaps that I have, or who has those strengths right around me, or even beyond me that I can go partner with to get what I want or what the firm needs to get or a client needs. Opportunities is what we've been talking about today. If we can get comfortable taking a little more risk, thinking out of the box, taking this time as a positive as opposed as a burden, you will create opportunities for yourself, your organizations, your clients, your families. And then lastly, again, having the self-awareness to know there are threats out there to me and to the world right now. We talked about just the threat of a very microscopic germ that has changed the way we will ever think about this decade. It has changed lives for the better and the worse, many for the worse, but we didn't even think about that threat. For those of you that may have had anything ever to do insurance, I spent an entire year helping get our organization ready for bird flu in the 1990s. You might recall there were only 2 documented cases of bird flu in the United States, but it was coming because we had evidence that it was coming, but it didn't come. That was a really big threat that put us back on our heels for a year. Y2K, another festive New Year's that many of us remember, the New Year's that wasn't. That might be this New Year's too. I'm going to have more champagne this time. But the New Year's that wasn't was Y2K, but we were ready. And it's chance favors a prepared mind, so it's good to be ready. We got ready for a risk we didn't understand. There's many risks we do understand because we live in the space we work in. We live in the universe we live in. So if we think of self-evaluating ourselves once in a while, we can take advantage of using our strengths more, eliminating or avoiding our weaknesses, taking advantage of opportunities in a prioritized way, and being realistic about threats. As you advance in your careers, we need to think bigger. Broader leaders think more broadly, and this next tool is one that Denise and I use, and it's an evolving tool because this used to be the PEST analysis, catchy name, and now it's the PESTEL analysis because we weren't thinking about all the larger opportunities and risks around us when these tools were started many years ago. But the PEST analysis is a quick way for any one of us to immediately be more strategic and a better critical thinker. By just thinking about this little horseshoe of terms around this light bulb that represents thoughts that you can, original and borrowed thoughts that you can have that can improve things in your world or with your clients or in your organizations. So this is taking a macro view because it just means big. Lifting your head higher than your desk, lifting your head higher than your organization, thinking about yourselves in a lake instead of a pond when you think about opportunities and your competitors. We've just had a big political shift. History will tell you it's not actually going to affect certain things. Some of the things we are worried about are not really going to change because that's how history shows and systems show, but a lot will change. And there are opportunities in that for all of us. Right down to some young people that I know that are sending their resumes right now to President-elect Biden. People are making moves to move towards this administration. Other people and businesses need to make different moves because there will be potentially negative effects of a different mindset coming out of the White House. There will be tax differences that will affect our businesses. There will be opportunities internationally and other opportunities locally that will affect our businesses. So thinking about the economic, the social, the technological, the environmental, and the legal changes or wins, WINDS, that are out there makes us a better thinker and enables us to take more informed risks. So it's a real opportunistic tool to periodically not only take a SWOT analysis, but take it higher to 30,000 feet, learn what you can. Leaders are readers. And you don't need to read anymore. You can listen while you're walking. You can look at listen to a podcast. You can learn from others, even on this call today, that have expertise in some of these areas. So how do I translate all that? Denise and I use a lot of snowmen, and we call it a bit of the language of leaders, this evolving language of leaders. This is not some sophisticated sentence, but this snowman helps me a lot. It's what, so what, now what? Again, it helps me become more strategic, a more critical thinker, and it helps me embrace risk in a way I can move my organization forward. So the what is what's going on out there. We have a few questions that go with the what. What's my greatest challenge? What's my greatest pain point right now? What's my greatest distraction? What's not going as I had hoped or I had planned? So this is your problem statement or your opportunity statement. There could be a million of these that we are all facing right now because of the change in the landscape that we're living in. What's important to do as a leader and someone that's trying to advance is to prioritize down the so what around that. There's a lot of stuff going on around us. We may have another toilet paper shortage. So what does that matter to me? There's all these things around us that we can control or not control. If you remember, Covey says there's only a small inner circle of things that we can actually control. And the most important of that are your mindset and my reaction to what's going on around me. Those are really the only two things we actually have full control of. So the so what questions we need to ask ourselves as we learn to embrace risk is why does this information matter to me? And if it doesn't, dismiss it for now. Is it really important? You know, we get a lot of information, you know, if it's on the internet, it must be true. But we have to figure out what's really important to what we're trying to do to eliminate some of those distractions or those challenges or those missed opportunities. And then what's the opportunity for me or my team or my organization right now? And I've been told you can really only work intentionally on 3 or 4 things at a time. So this is also an opportunity to give ourselves permission to say, I don't need to work on that now. I could do that later, or I may never have to do that. This is what's important or interesting in that so what part of the snowman for me. The last one is the now what. And this is what differentiates good and great leaders. The now what throws us into action. The now what is for those of us that can say, I've prioritized, I'm informed now, I'm going to do something differently. I'm going to find a different way to fund it because I don't have the money to do it. I'm going to think differently for my client because things are happening for them now too. I may even start partnerships with people or experts I've never thought about partnering with before. And what we all have to think about is how can I do more with less? Not only because blockchain's been affected and there are and will be shortages of both human capital and other resources, but because being more efficient creates capacity to do the really exciting stuff. So this is a tool that Denise and I use. For me, I use it a lot to prioritize because my to-do list is a mile long. And even at night while I'm sleeping, I reach out of bed and I write on this pad that I can't really read in the morning because I've written it while I'm sleeping. But again, it's for me to be able to say each day, this is what I'm going to work on well, and this is what I'm going to let go of. It's a little bit of that start, stop, continues spectrum that we talk about also. So the takeaway here is there's so much information out there. Some of it we've mastered, some of which we don't even understand. But what information do I know to make a good decision so that I can move into the so what and the now what of effective leadership and effective management and effective growth, even during a time where we feel like we're trying to grow through molasses right now. So I use this tool a lot. The other thing I do is I try to still learn from experts every day, and some of you are right on this call. I can learn something from every one of you. But Denise and I are readers. Sometimes we're just podcast readers or fast readers, or all I read is the synopsis. But I've had the pleasure, I consider Susie Welch a friend. She in her own right, hugely successful woman. She was the editor of the Harvard Business Review. She's written several books. She writes for Business Week and does all kinds of interesting things. Oh yeah, on the side, she was married to Jack Welch, which had to have been an interesting conversation on a daily basis, and Jack was my boss. But this book, 10-10-10, is one I give out all the time. It reminds me that not everything is fail-safe zero. Not everything is going to be the end of the world. Sometimes I have to remind myself, no matter what, I'm pretty sure the sun's coming up tomorrow, no matter what. And yesterday, one of our friends, Denise and I, gave us what their inspirational quote was, so far, I have 100% survival rate. And I loved that one. I used it yesterday for one of my children that was struggling. I said to her, so far, 26 years in, you're still alive. You've had 100% survival rate, no matter what's gone right or wrong for you. And even in 25, 26 years, young people have had a lot of challenges, just like we all have. 10-10-10 reminds me, some decisions are only going to impact my world for 10 minutes. Some decisions are going to impact the world or my world for 10 months, and some for 10 years. So why in the world am I putting so much energy into those ones that affect me for 10 minutes? Why am I laboriously debating about taking a risk of whether to have a ham sandwich or a roast beef sandwich because one's got 150 calories and one's got 170? I'm going to have the chips anyway. Why am I debating this? But the 10-month or the 10 weeks or the 10-year ones, they warrant our attention. They warrant us getting the information we need from others if we don't have it, deciphering the now what out of it, and then moving forward and learning from the experience. So for me, I need a roadmap, and this is a perspective giver for me because I move fast and perspective is one of my voids. So I have to get it from other people. Susie does a great job with this book. I'm sure it's on audio and line too. Otherwise, I have 100 copies. Let me know. The other books that Denise and I like on this topic, and again, pull from these to the extent they're interesting to you. Many of you might have met Chip and Dan Heath. They've attended many forums in Kansas City and speak nationally all the time. You can listen to them all the time. They've come to Kansas City for the Central Exchange Summit on occasion, but their book is actually a workbook. And I like those kind of books too, because they give me a roadmap. In this case, they use something called a WRAP framework, and it's just an algorithm that reminds us, think bigger than your pond. Think about a lake, think about the ocean when you're thinking about opportunities and who I can effectively and in a productive way compete with next. Do some reality test assumptions, get the right information, get someone, a truth sayer in your life to say that isn't going to work. Help people help yourself to protect yourself from yourself sometimes. We tend to fall in lust and in love with information sometimes because we think it's telling us what we want. That's dangerous when we're making decisions, especially those even 2 inches out of our comfort zone. And then get some distance away from deciding. Do you know there actually is evidence that shows that sleeping on it, we used to say that, let me sleep on it, that actually is a tool for making better decisions. Because when we're sleeping, we mitigate that risk a little bit. We think through things. I actually reorganize furniture while I'm sleeping. I don't know how it happens, but I wake up and I have to move that chair. But my point is that our body, we have several levels of our mind in the cognitive part of our brain, and it's actually processing. That whole part of our brain has a life cycle, and at the end, we're better with the much older information than the newer, but things are happening while we're sleeping, or even just taking any kind of distance. You know that when you're about to implode, you tell yourself to count to 10 first. These are all tools to get comfortable with making better decisions and being a better and more critical thinker. And then prepare to be wrong. And what they remind us is what we've shared with you today. And Denise and I could give you a book of stories of mistakes we've made that we too survived and that came out okay, because we learned something. And most importantly, we didn't forget what we learned the next time. We built from that experiential learning in 2 ways. One, I tried it once, that went okay, but I can do it better this time. But the other thing that we're learning is that we do survive mistakes, and that's what happens, and we can move forward from them. The Art of the Long View is a scenario testing book, and it's a great one too. Instead of jumping off that cliff, and if you think about it, the Kindergarten Roundup story is an example of a scenario testing. They show those children, this is what's going to happen, and here's what the outcome's going to be, and this is what you can expect. We, of course, want to test various scenarios when we're thinking about making a decision to change, or to change careers, or to change a process, or to change vendors, or to eliminate a product. Right now in the world, there's more merger and acquisition work going on than there has been a long time. Not because the economy is so good for it, but because many companies are making the hard and good decisions to shed certain things that they have done historically to create capacity to do more needed, more interesting, more productive parts of what they can use their skills for. So there's a swap going on around the country of parts of companies where someone else would love to do more of what you used to do, and someone else wants to do less of what they're doing now. So this Art of the Long View reminds us, get the data, think through, try to visualize the outcome of various scenarios so that you can weight them, even if it's just your gut, and your gut is really informed. We sometimes say, oh, I knew it in my gut. Yeah, it was your gut, but it really was an informed gut because you've been alive a while and you've stumbled and thrived, and that's what comes into our gut. So the point here is we just want to share with you that we don't take making decisions lightly. We have bold goals, and we encourage you to have bold goals so that you can lean into them and you can get to them with the help of others, with the right data, with some expert analysis and support from others, and from just visualizing yourself there and going through some of the steps to get there. We can't do it from afar. We have to go through it to grow through it. And we just wanted to share with you today some of the tools we use even now, 40 years into this experiment they call your career, because things are changing now and we're all making decisions, small and large, about our businesses, our careers, our personal lives, because we've been given this reset. But we're not on timeout. We're just working through, in a most positive way, the reset. And it's a cool, really cool opportunity. So when you're setting those bold goals, try to put risk aside a little bit. Try to remember the 2-inch tattoo, and try to think about, wouldn't it be cool if, and fill that sentence in, because it will take a little bit of risk, but it probably will be worth it. So we very much enjoyed talking with you today, and we fully recognize that your shoulders are carrying a lot, especially, I don't know, working women. I know there's a special place in heaven for women that help other women, but I say there's a special place in heaven too for working women, whether you're working in the home, out of the home, or both at the same time right now. So we have to stay up and positive. And we want to give each of you and ourselves sort of the last word on this is, what's your superwoman power pose, or what is it you're doing now to stay up, to stay motivated, to know that the sun's coming up tomorrow morning, because it would be a great way to end our session, as well as any questions that you all may have. So you can either put those in the chat. We'd love you to put those in the chat. Some of the things you do to stay positive, and I'll ask Denise to share hers as well.
Thanks, Robin. So I'll watch the chat as well, but I have to tell you something that I've been doing so my grandchildren are living here with me. So I was an empty nester. My children are all grown. But my son and daughter-in-law and their two children, who are ages 9 and 5, are temporarily living with me while they're in between homes, which you can imagine has changed my lifestyle. And there's all this new energy in the home, which I have to tell you, I'm going to miss them so much when they're gone. But one of the things that I did with my kids when they were little, and now having grandchildren around the table, and my son loved that I asked the first night at dinner, I said, okay, we're going to play a game that I did with your dad at dinner, and it's called Our Happies and Our Crappies. So every night I'm going to ask you, what's your happy and what's your crappy? And for two reasons. One, and we all need to talk about our happies. We know that gratitude is so important during this time, but we also need to name our crappies. We need to acknowledge that sometimes sometimes we don't even know why we feel heavy or why we feel just tired, or no energy. So I have to tell you what happened last night at dinner. So my grandson, he started like this. He of course always has a happy. In fact, this is how invaluable this is. They've been here now for several months, but on the first couple of days, he would come into the house and he'd be like, Grandma, I have a happy for you. And I'm like, oh, got to save it till dinner time. And he would just be so excited, looking forward all day long to find the best happy to share with me. And I think that's a reminder for me, certainly, that because of the simple game of happy and crappy, or the gratitudes, all day long, he's looking for something to be happy about. So here's how it started. Here was his crappy last night. Oh, Grandma, my crappy is my friend pushed me. And I'm like, yeah, that is crappy. But I said, but you got up. And he's like, yeah. And you're okay. And he's like, yeah. So isn't that a happy? And all of a sudden he was like, oh my gosh, Grandma, that's my new happy. And it just made me laugh. But I think that's us as well. We, in all of these times of adversity, he was telling a crappy of falling down, and I'm giving him the happy of, but you got up and you're fine and you're stronger, right? And that boy who pushed you saw you get up, and so now he knows you're a get up kind of person. You're not a stay down kind of person. And suddenly it completely changed his perspective on what's happy and what's crappy. So that's mine, and really that is just a gift that my kids give me, and now my grandkids give me as well. Robin, what's one of yours?
I just tried to reach out to other people that I've been always too busy. I also tried to take out the word busy from my world, because people will say to me, how are you? And I say I'm busy, and I can just watch their faces as they shut down, because I'm always busy. So I've really tried to not only not say it, but not be as busy. And that's been just great, because I get up some days and say, I'm going to purposely leave time to do something different today, whether it's to reach out to somebody. I live alone, and my kids are scattered. I've had them coming and going through different COVID scenarios, but through Zoom, I get to connect with people, and I'm making an effort to connect with people I haven't connected with a long time. And some of it takes a little courage, because if I haven't talked to someone in like 4 years, I'm sure they're looking at the caller ID going, oh, what does she want? But the minute you start talking, all time passes and drops away, and it's just so great to reconnect. And I guess that's what keeping a network vibrant is about, especially with people you care about. So, and you always learn something that you can help somebody with, or some happy news you didn't know. So that's what I do. And I see some great things in the chat that are just great things that people are doing, that are everything from mental uppers to physical uppers to just a process orientation, that we're giving ourselves permission to do things differently. So we really appreciate this. I think you probably all know this by now, but you work on different platforms. The bottom right, there are 3 little dots in a bubble. If you hit that, you'll save your chat, and it will go to your Zoom file. It won't be pretty, but all these great suggestions that you've made amongst yourselves, and we really do appreciate your engagement today. It's a little weird when Denise and I are just looking at each other giving this presentation, but you've given us great energy, and we're so passionate about all this. So if we can help any of you in any way with anything we've talked about today, or any of the other 2 sessions that are out there on the YouTube, or in our day jobs, as you know, Denise is she told that story about her momentary lack of facilitation skills, but she is an Olympiad at everything she does around strategic planning, facilitating, coaching, executive coaching, and building leaders. It's a privilege that I get to work with her almost every day of the week, somewhere, somehow, so that's really cool for me. I help women build wealth, and I do that through a wealth management firm because I think hardworking women should have their money working hard for them. So I do that, as well as try to bring all the bumps and lessons I've learned from 30 years of being at GE and then on Wall Street before that to people. So we're here to help if we can in every way. It's great that you're involved with this organization and that you chose to be in the Wednesday Women's Series. Good for you for making that choice and investing in yourself for 90 minutes. So unless there's any questions, we're being asked, Brandy, if someone's asking if we could, if they can get the PowerPoint and the recording. Absolutely, you can have the PowerPoint from us, and Brandy's got the recording, so I'll leave that up to her. And I just got some great news, Denise. I don't know if you just saw in the chat.
I did.
Yes, so somebody on this chat is one of our former students who we adore and love, and hugely successful, and she just told us, because we can't really, just told us she got married, so congratulations to you. That's your happy. Wow.
Happy dance, happy dance.
So, but thank you for sharing, and thank you all for connecting with us today. You made our day better, so thank you. I'll pass back to Brandy.
Great. Thank you, Robin and Denise, so much for this session. And I've also saved the chat. So if someone hasn't saved the chat log, I will be happy to send that out to everyone. And I did mention earlier, but I'll just restate it, that we're recording the session and we will be posting it on our YouTube channel. It takes us about a week to get it edited and posted. So give us just a little bit of time and we'll have that up for you guys. Hopefully you will all have a great day and enjoy a safe and happy holiday season. Thanks so much.